It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. Benito Mussolini needs no introduction. The Italian dictator who was the founding father of fascism, and the man who famously, or infamously, could not take over Greece without the help of his more famous partner in crime, Adolf Hitler. This quote in a way provides a glimpse into how his inner feelings were towards the world, and where he thought Italy should have really belonged in his mind. Did he think that Italy was a sheep, or conquering the Mediterranean would make him a lion on the world stage? Apparently so, and this sentiment wasn't anything new for his time. Italy was always seen as a second-rate power that came to the game later than its French and British counterparts. Mussolini wanted to recreate the Roman Empire, and in trying to do so, failed spectacularly. His early conquests of world powerhouses Albania and Ethiopia seemed to earn him respect amongst his countrymen, and this is where the highs end, and from there on his failures in Africa and the Mediterranean were infamous for being catastrophically bad, and even 80 years after the end of World War II, there are still memes about the performance of the Italian army. Imagine being mocked 80 years after you've lost World War II, man. That's a record. So, what if in an alternate timeline, Mussolini actually cooked and didn't fall to his knees in an incredible fashion, and he managed to not only fulfill his territorial ambitions, or just managed to bring Italy to a favourable position by the end of World War II? In this vid, I'll go over some of the ways in which Mussolini could have survived the war without being hung like salami in Milan by the end of it. So, let's get into it. Now, to preface this, I'm not a fascist sympathiser or anything like that. Do I think that Mussolini could ever have it in him to be reasonable and not batshit insane when it came to leading his country? Absolutely not. Otherwise this video wouldn't be made. Mussolini had a few personality flaws. He could never not be a bully or even hot-headed. He was in street fights as a youth, and he was addicted to drama and just being a tyrant in general. Prior to signing up Italy in World War II, Mussolini actually had a semi-decent reputation and was admired on both sides of the political spectrum for managing to take over Italy and, to his credit, created many public work programs and greatly reduced the influence of the mafia, particularly in regions like Sicily. Where Mussolini's downfall came from was his inability to not overeat. And by this, I mean when he saw Hitler knocking down France in June 1940, he couldn't resist in joining in and then barely made any progress into France himself before gaining substantial land in the ensuing armistice between Germany and France. He had literally been the kid in class in the group assignment that had written his name at the top, done no work, and received an A+. By this point in 1940, Germany actually would have preferred for Italy to remain neutral, as their entry into the war would overcomplicate things and may have actually made their war harder, as they would now need to fight in the Mediterranean. And Hitler was genuinely right in this. As soon as Mussolini had done this, he set the stage for his own embarrassment. The Italian army in 1940 was hopelessly ill-prepared for a war. Its artillery was almost all World War I era, the Air Force was still using biplanes, there was a notable lack of raw materials, and leadership quality was really poor. Mussolini was to personally lead the Navy, Army and Air Force, but then leaving the leaders of these three to inform Mussolini of their combat operations rather than do things themselves. Italy's underwar secretary had predicted that Italy would not be ready for a large-scale conflict until October 1942. To put it simply, despite Italy's regional power in the Mediterranean, it still greatly lagged behind France, Britain, Germany and almost every other great power at the time. So how could Mussolini have cooked if his country was lagging behind other great powers? For starters, he could have stayed neutral and held back from attacking France and declaring war on them and Britain in June 1940. Prior to this, Mussolini was eyeing off Yugoslavia and Greece. It has been suggested that Italy was about to invade Yugoslavia in April 1940, but got cold feet. Whilst these territorial ambitions were always itching at Mussolini, and he got FOMO from Hitler conquering everything in his path, if he had just stayed put and pulled a Franco, and sat on the sidelines until at least later in the war, it would have put Italy in a much more favourable position. If we look at neutral countries during World War II, such as Switzerland and Sweden, their economies boomed as they were able to trade with both the Axis and the Allies, and in the case of Switzerland, was a core financial hub. In some weird timeline, Italian cities such as Rome or Milan could have been much more lucrative from this increased trade, maybe even to the level of a Zurich or a Geneva. But probably not though, I'm just speculating. But let's say this is impossible and Mussolini was always going to attack his neighbours because he's a war-thirsty guerrilla, so what happens then? Well, let's try and break this down rationally. As soon as Mussolini declares war on France and Britain, the writing is on the wall for him. So instead, he needs to focus on attacking smaller powers like Yugoslavia or Greece. The problem is that Greece is being protected by British guarantees of its independence, and as a result, the next best thing is Yugoslavia. Now, I'm not saying that this is even a smart move to make, but given Mussolini was a hungry chimpanzee, he needed to satisfy his lust for attacking smaller nations and being a bully. So, if Mussolini did attack Yugoslavia in late 1940, rather than Greece, it's unlikely that Britain would have intervened, given its proximity to Yugoslavia and, its war with Germany going on at the same time that was a bit more higher priority. British and French lack of assistance to Finland as well during its war with the Soviet Union also would have meant that Yugoslavia would have been pretty low priority for the British to do anything to help. Maybe they would have embargoed Italy, but that would have been pretty ineffective in the grand scheme of things. From this point on though, who's to say that this would have even worked out for Italy? Their invasion of Greece in our timeline was completely botched and quite embarrassing, and they would have probably found it difficult to attack Yugoslavia at the same time. I'd imagine Germany would have held off from attacking, as Italy didn't partake in taking over France at this point, and it was also tied down in occupying half of Western Europe. From this point onwards, it's difficult to determine how Mussolini would have played out the rest of World War II. If he conquers Yugoslavia, does he move on to other countries in Eastern Europe? Would Hitler stop him from a conflict of interest? Would he manage to pull off any invasion successfully? In any case, his next biggest thing which would have made him better off would have not been to declare war or invade the Soviet Union when Germany did so in June 1941. This would have sealed his fate entirely and would have dragged him into the war with Britain as well. If Mussolini straddled the line of being a co-belligerent of Germany but not getting caught up into their conflicts and instead conducting their own wars and invasions and holding neutral relations with the Allies like Spain, they would have probably been left alone. Let's say if Italy had acted like Japan and while officially being allied with Germany on paper, did their own thing without bothering the Allies, they probably would have been okay. Of course, this didn't end up happening, and Mussolini ultimately dragged his country into unnecessary war and destruction and was not able to get out of it until it finally caught up to him in 1945, after his control of Italy was reduced to little more than a German puppet state. As soon as Germany invaded the USSR, the war was going to end in Hitler's defeat. If Mussolini managed to somehow not be involved in this when the war would end, probably around the same time in 1945, Italy would have probably become a pariah state and would resemble that of Franco-Spain. They will probably be banned from joining the UN like Spain was in our timeline, and they might be pressured to abandon Yugoslavia or Albania in the wake of communism or international pressure from the Allies or the Soviets. As Italy's geographic position in Europe would be near that of the new communist states that the Soviets would establish, and their position would be very strongly anti-communist, the post-war order actually might have been favourable to that of Italy. In any case, it's clear that this wasn't meant to be. Mussolini was way too thick-headed and incompetent to ever lead his people gracefully or with desire to coexist peacefully with his neighbouring states. His opportunistic approach backfired outstandingly, and whilst he could have sat on the sidelines like Franco-Spain, he couldn't help himself and got FOMO when attacking neighbouring countries. Thankfully, Italy was never able to be a war machine like that of Hitler's Germany, and was probably more of a detriment than an asset to the Axis powers. For Mussolini to make Italy thrive, he needed to play both sides of the fence and not operate in an ecosystem that he led, but could profit from. He needed to be a parasite, like a mosquito. Which is actually kind of ironic because he once said that the best blood will at some time get into a fool or a mosquito. But in Mussolini's case, he couldn't even pick which one to be. Anyway, thanks for watching guys. If you liked the vid, slap the like button, feel free to sub, and comment how you think Mussolini could have done better overall if you think he could. Comment what you'd also like to see next. Peace out and see you then.